Howdy folks. This time around we're going to be chasing some oil leaks in the old 740 turbo. Coyote has put this task off for far too long. I'm not much on rocky marking territories wherever he goes. If interested, stay tuned and we'll wrench into this old thing. First things first, we'll jack it up, get it up as high as we can with what we have. Our first goal is to take out the transmission. This has the AW71 automatic transmission. We'll start by draining the fluids. Note here as I pan off into the tire spine cobwebs. This car has been off the road for a few months. Just totally embarrassed by all the oil that's been spitting everywhere. Having never removed this transmission, I had the book open for a few pointers, reference, whatnot. Good old shop manual, Haynes. They give you just enough information to get into trouble, but I still gather information from it. We removed the starter and the dipstick tube. A large extension on the socket and ratchet helped to get the starter out. Then I plugged up the holes as good as I could. Automatic transmissions, they have a lot of fluid in them. You're going to make a mess. There's no way you can... The torque converter has fluid in it. It's just, you're going to get fluid everywhere. It makes a mess, but it's part of the process. Here I filmed the drivetrain. It doesn't really show up on camera here, but there is oil everywhere. Over time, it got worse and worse to a point where I just had to do this. This is a big job. It's not something you really want to do over a weekend. I guess if you're highly motivated and you got a nice space, you can make it happen. I did this work in a carport. At least I was out of the rain. The majority of this task was cleaning up all the contaminant that had dispersed itself all over the drivetrain. Sorry about my shaky camera skills. I was under the vehicle, lying on a concrete slab on my back, with the starter removed and the dipstick tube and the transmission lines that go to the radiator. Then removed the downpipe. Notice here I'm cluing in. This is actually a Ford O2 sensor that I've adapted. I put in my own quick disconnect. This project was definitely a clean as you go process. I used a lot of cat litter. At the end of my shift working on this, I would just cover the floor, and the next day I sweep it up. You can recycle it. Anyway, this is how I kept my disasters from entering the house and disturbing the wife. Next, we'll remove the driveline. Make sure you mark all of your connections so you can reinstall it. Volvo's drive lines are balanced and they need to be installed exactly the way they came off. A marking pen will suffice. Next, we'll use a transmission jack to support it while we remove all the boltage. We removed the rear support cross member and found the transmission bracket had busted. I had replaced this mount not very long ago, and at that time it wasn't broken, so this is news to me. This part was kind of a bear to find. Volvo no longer makes this part, and the part number has been recycled into a later Volvo part. More on that later. With the transmission unmated from the motor, the engine, it can be lowered and removed from underneath the car. Sadly, the transmission jack that I used did not lower it enough to actually clear the vehicle, so I had to basically arm wrestle it off the jack onto the ground and then pull it out, and had some more spillage of transmission fluid. Here we have it removed, out in the sun for inspection, back on the jack stand for mobility. Here's our bracket that was broken. I was unable to find this part new or used locally. To clean parts, I use paint thinner and brass brushes. As you can see, we're making progress. I have it sitting in a tray. This tray is actually used for the underside of washing machines, and it actually works out pretty well. At the end, you can scrape it all out and clean it and reuse it. And the end result. Back into the car, we'll remove the flex plate, 8 bolts, and you'll have to secure it somehow so the engine doesn't turn. I used a pair of vice grips on the side. With that removed, we can inspect the rear of the engine, and here we have some oil contaminant occurring. It's not as bad as I thought it was, but it's probably due time for the rear engine seal to be replaced. We then removed the engine oil and removed the oil filter. I removed this. It wasn't necessary to remove it, but I needed access to this area. And here we're seeing some parts that I will be deleting. More on that a little bit later. B230 FT engines, or turbo engines. It's a tight fit for getting the filter out. The next process is to hoist the motor up to clear the cross member so you can get the oil pan out. I used a chain and an engine hoist. I then removed the rear crank engine seal and inspected. It was working, but as you can see, it was easily torn. It was degrading, and it is time for a replacement. We then had to remove the oil pan. There's 18 bolts. It's a tight fit. I had to actually raise the engine a little bit further to get it out. You don't actually have to remove the engine. There's just enough to get it out. And you can see someone's been in here before. Silicone sealer. Not a fan. The oil pan gasket was brittle. Trash at this point. It will be replaced. Coyote spent a little time cleaning up the oil pan, gave it a respray. And now I'd like to talk about the oil cooler system. Okay, I want to quickly discuss the oil cooling systems that Volvo used. They used two different types. One is using the engine's oil through a cooler, which is mounted by the radiator. Oil flows through these lines and back again into the donut. The later system used water through the radiator, using antifreeze that runs through the donut. When I picked up this car, it was a hackery of both of these combined. And so now I'm simplifying, I'm deleting all of this. When I first got the car, it had this piece here. I have deleted that and used, and the only reason we're deleting is because of this T right here. The earliers don't have that T, so I have an earlier T installed. This line actually goes into the block, and we're capping that off. There was some hackery right here at this joint. They did a bunch of hose clamps and whatnot. It was basically just messy, and it got in the way of working on stuff like changing the oil filter. So now we are going back to this whole system, and we are replacing these lines because this line right here was compromised. Anyway, there's a quick summary of where we're at with this whole setup. Thank you. And here we'll survey the water line that will be deleted because it's not needed. It's not being used. I'm using the older style oil cooler. This is mounted to the block just under the head. It runs antifreeze back and forth. Here's the hackery that someone kind of thought this was okay. I mean, it worked, but this is not how I do things, especially for how easy it is to just remove it and cap it off. You're dealing with 22 millimeter connections. I will be utilizing the stock nut and applying this cap that fits inside. This setup will clean up my engine compartment, give me more room, and if I ever needed to utilize this line, it could easily be reinstalled. This little cap was less than $5. This versus this, it's crazy. Anyway, this is where we're going. And here we have where that line comes out of the block. Note, more oil contaminant. This I cleaned up a little bit later. And once again, here's some reference photos of the old style and the new style. The change was back in about '94, I believe. Unfortunately, I found some turmoil. One of the steel lines that goes to the oil cooler was compromised. Here you can see it. It was hidden behind the clamp. I believe this is actually one of the main reasons I was leaking so much oil. But with the oil pan, the oil seal, and this replaced, I think we are going to have a very drivable car. Unfortunately, Volvo does not sell this part anymore through the dealer. So I had 2 hoses fabricated, and these will connect to the oil cooler. And here's Coyote screwing around with an unboxing. Unfortunately, this was the wrong part. And so now we're ready for reassembly. At this point, I'm going to end this video. And I hope you can look forward to the next episode where we will get this back out on the road. If you like this sort of thing, please hit the like button. You can always subscribe to my channel. I have content that covers various subjects. You can leave comments. I do read the comments. This is basically just footage with me narrating for most of it. That's the easiest way for me to get these jobs done. I am unable to film and speak a lot of times, especially under the environment that I'm working. This old Grandpa Series 700, 900 car, they are disappearing. They're not as plentiful as they once were. Parts are getting harder to come by. So if you're still with us, thanks for watching. Look for part 2. Make sure you're subscribed, and you have a good day, all of you.